Hey everyone, and a very gentle welcome to you. Tonight, we're going to pull back the velvet curtain on one of history's most glamorous eras, the Renaissance. We often picture the great masters, Michelangelo, Leonardo, as solitary geniuses, touched by the divine, creating masterpieces in a flash of inspiration. But the reality was a lot dustier, and frankly, a lot more exhausting, especially if you were one of the unseen hands in the workshop. We're going to talk about the painter's assistant. You know, if you think your internship involves a lot of fetching coffee, wait till you hear about their daily grind. It might make you look at that beautiful Renaissance altarpiece and wonder just how much backbreaking labor went into painting one angel's wing. Before we start mixing pigments, if you enjoy these little historical wanderings, perhaps you could give the like button a gentle tap, or subscribe so we can continue to explore these forgotten lives together. I always love hearing where in the world you're listening from. It's wonderful to know we're all sharing this quiet moment. So if you feel inclined, leave a hello in the comments. Alright, let's dim the lights just a little bit more, and step into the bustling, colorful, and very tiring world of a Renaissance workshop. In the thriving cities of Renaissance Italy, Florence, Venice, Rome, art was not the product of isolated, bohemian geniuses. It was a trade, a craft, and a business, governed by ancient guild rules and centered on the bustling workshop, or bottega. The bottega was the heart of all artistic production. It was a dynamic, often chaotic space, smelling of linseed oil, wood shavings, and mineral dust, where a master painter oversaw a team of apprentices and assistants to fulfill a constant stream of commissions from wealthy patrons, churches, and civic bodies. To become a painter, one didn't enroll in an art school in the modern sense. Instead, a young boy, typically between the ages of 7 and 14, would be apprenticed to a master. This was a formal, long-term arrangement, often lasting for many years, legally bound by a contract signed between the master and the boy's father. In exchange for his son's tireless labor, the father would pay a fee, and the master would agree to provide lodging, food, and most importantly, a thorough education in the art and mystery of painting. The boy would live in the master's house, becoming, for all intents and purposes, a member of the household, albeit the lowest ranking one. Life in the bottega was strictly hierarchical. At the top was the master, the maestro, the owner of the business and the creative force. Below him were senior assistants or journeymen, skilled artists in their own right who had completed their apprenticeships and were now paid a wage. And at the very bottom of this bustling pyramid were the young apprentices, the garzoni. Their first years were dedicated not to learning the finer points of composition or color theory, but to sheer, unadulterated drudgery. This was a deliberate system. It was believed that art was a craft that had to be learned from the ground up, starting with the most basic materials and tasks. Humility, discipline, and an intimate knowledge of the physical substances of art were considered essential foundations for any aspiring painter. The romance of creation was a distant dream. The reality was a long, arduous climb, starting with the broom and the grinding slab. The apprentice's day was long, beginning at dawn and often continuing late into the evening, 6 or even 7 days a week. It was a life of constant work, with little time for personal freedom or leisure. Theirs was the unseen labor upon which the glittering masterpieces of the Renaissance were built. Now, imagine this is your world. You are 12 years old, perhaps your name is Piero. Your father, a modest tailor, has just signed the papers that bind you to the workshop of a respected Florentine maestro for the next 6 years. You are a bundle of nerves and excitement. You've always loved to draw, scratching figures in the dirt with a stick, and to be here, in a real bottega, feels like a dream. The workshop is a large, high-ceilinged room, with a great window facing north to catch the steady, shadowless light. The air is thick with strange, intoxicating smells, the sharp, nutty scent of linseed oil, the earthy aroma of raw clays and minerals, the sweet smell of turpentine, all overlaid with a fine, pervasive dust that catches the light in golden shafts. Canvases and wooden panels of all sizes lean against the walls. Unfinished paintings of saints and Madonnas gaze down at you with serene, half-painted eyes. Several older boys and young men are at work, their faces serious and focused, their movements economical and precise. And there, in the center of it all, is the maestro himself, dabbing at a portrait with a confidence that seems magical to you. Your dream, however, quickly collides with reality. The master gives you a cursory glance, then gestures to a senior assistant, a stern young man named Luca. Luca looks you up and down, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or just weary experience, in his eyes. He doesn't hand you a piece of charcoal or a brush. He hands you a broom. "The floor, Garzone," he says, his voice flat. "Every speck of dust. The master cannot have dust settling on his wet varnish." And so your artistic education begins. You sweep. You sweep up wood shavings, discarded scraps of charcoal, and mounds of fine, colored dust that hints at the glorious pigments being used elsewhere in the room. You learn to be meticulous, to get into every corner, to work quietly so as not to disturb the concentration of the painters. Once the floor is clean, you are sent on errands. "Piero! Run to the apothecary for more lapis lazuli. Piero, take this message to the Palazzo Vecchio." You dash through the crowded, noisy streets of Florence, dodging carts and stray dogs, your head full of the sights and sounds of the city, but your mind focused on not failing in your simple task. You are the workshop's legs, its gopher, its lowest common denominator. But your most important, most exhausting, and most soul-crushingly repetitive task is yet to come. Luca leads you to a corner of the workshop, where several large, heavy-looking stone slabs are set on low benches. On one of the slabs is a small pile of gritty, earth-colored lumps. Luca hands you a muller, a heavy, bell-shaped grinder made of porphyry or glass. "This is raw umber," he explains, pointing to the lumps. "It needs to be ground. Not for an hour. Not until you think it's done. But until I say it's done. It must be as fine as flour, as smooth as oil. The master's paint must have no grit." He shows you the motion, a steady, circular grinding, leaning your body weight into the muller, adding a little water or oil as you go. It looks simple enough. You begin. The muller is heavier than it looks. The grinding motion is awkward at first, and your arm and shoulder begin to ache within minutes. You push and grind, round and round. The gritty sound of the stone on stone is monotonous. A fine, brown dust rises, coating your hands, your clothes, your face. You can taste it in the back of your throat. An hour passes. Your arm feels like lead, your back is stiff, and the pile of pigment seems barely changed. You glance over at the other apprentices, who are now sketching or mixing colors, and a wave of envy washes over you. This isn't art. This is just labor. Luca comes over, dips a finger in your pile of pigment, and rubs it on his thumb. He shakes his head. "More. It's still gritty. The particles must be broken down completely." You want to cry out in frustration, but you bite your lip and continue. You grind for what feels like an entire day. Round and round, the sound a constant drone, your muscles screaming in protest. Finally, Luca gives a nod of approval. The pigment is now a smooth, buttery paste. You have produced a tiny pot of color, enough for maybe a few square inches of a painting. And then, he points to another pile of minerals on the next slab, this one a brilliant, toxic-looking yellow. "Now orpiment," he says. And you begin again. This is your life now, an endless cycle of sweeping, running, and grinding, your hands stained with the colors you dream of one day being allowed to paint with. As you finally lay your weary body down on your simple straw pallet in the attic that night, your muscles twitching with exhaustion, the glorious vision of being a painter seems very, very far away. Your first lesson is one of humility, learned at the grinding slab. Your promotion from the grinding slab does not mean your days of physical labor are over. Far from it. The exhaustion simply becomes more refined, more focused. The work is still immensely tiring, but now it is coupled with a new, nerve-wracking pressure, the demand for absolute perfection. A mistake now could ruin weeks of work and expensive materials, earning you not just a harsh word from Luca, but the cold, disappointed glare of the maestro himself. Your new responsibilities lie in the art of preparation, a craft so essential that without it, the most brilliant painting would crack, flake, and fade within a generation. You are learning to build the very foundation of the painting, a task as vital and demanding as the final brushstrokes. One of the most common tasks now entrusted to you is the preparation of wooden panels for tempera painting. The master has a commission for a new altarpiece for a wealthy merchant's family chapel. It will be painted on poplar wood, chosen for its fine grain and stability. Your job begins not with a smooth, ready-made canvas, but with rough planks of wood. Under the supervision of a senior assistant, you learn to join the planks perfectly, to sand and plane them until they are level and true. Then comes the crucial first stage of sealing the wood. You are put in charge of the glue pot, a smelly, bubbling cauldron of animal hide clippings and water that must be heated to just the right temperature. The smell is pungent and clings to your clothes, a constant reminder of your trade. You learn to paint this hot, sticky size onto the panel, working it into the grain of the wood to seal it from moisture. Next, you must prepare the panel to receive the paint. You can't paint directly onto the wood. The surface must be perfectly smooth and non-absorbent. This is achieved with gesso, a brilliant white ground made from a mixture of animal glue, water, and either gypsum or chalk. It's a multi-stage, painstaking process. First, you apply the gesso grosso, a coarser, thicker layer that fills any imperfections in the wood. You slather it on with a brush, layer after layer, letting each one dry. Once it's built up, the real labor begins. You spend hours scraping it down with metal tools, your arms aching as you work to create a level, but still slightly rough surface. Any tiny lump or hollow at this stage will be magnified in the final painting, a permanent flaw. The white dust gets everywhere, covering you in a fine powder until you look like a ghost. After the gesso grosso is deemed perfect, you move on to the gesso sottile, the fine gesso. This is a much smoother, creamier mixture, made from slaked plaster of Paris that has been aged and purified. You apply this in thin, almost translucent layers, sometimes as many as 8 or 10 of them, each one brushed on with care and allowed to dry completely. The goal is to build up a surface that is pristine, white, and flawless. And once all the layers are applied, the final, most exhausting stage begins, the polishing. You sit for days with the panel on your lap, scraping, sanding, and burnishing the gesso surface. You use fine cloths, the abrasive skin of a dogfish, and polishing stones, working the surface over and over until it is as smooth and cool to the touch as a piece of polished ivory. It must be absolutely perfect, with no scratches, no bumps, no imperfections whatsoever. By the end, your fingers are raw, your back is a knot of pain, but the panel glows with a soft, luminous light of its own. You have not painted a thing, yet you have created the perfect ground for a heavenly scene, a smooth, white world waiting for the master's vision. This intense preparation was the secret to the longevity and jewel-like quality of Renaissance panel paintings. The smooth, non-porous gesso ground allowed the egg tempera paint to sit on the surface, its colors remaining brilliant and true for centuries. On other occasions, the work takes you out of the bottega and into the vast, chilly spaces of a church or the grand hall of a wealthy patron. The master has been commissioned to paint a fresco, a mural on a plaster wall. The physical demands here are even greater. Your first task is to help construct the scaffolding, hauling heavy wooden planks and lashing them together with ropes, high above the stone floor. It's dangerous, precarious work. Then you must help prepare the wall itself. You apply the first rough coat of plaster, the arricho. You and the other assistants mix sand, lime, and water in great troughs, a heavy, wet slurry that you then have to haul up the scaffolding in buckets and trowel onto the brick or stone wall. Your arms and back ache from the repetitive lifting and spreading. Once the arricho is dry, the master's design must be transferred to the wall. The maestro will have prepared a full-scale drawing, a cartoon, on heavy paper. It is your job to help transfer this image. One common method is pouncing. You and the other assistants meticulously prick tiny holes along all the lines of the master's drawing with a needle. Then you hold the cartoon against the wall and gently dab a small muslin bag filled with charcoal dust, the pounce bag, over the holes. When the cartoon is removed, a faint, dotted outline of the entire composition remains on the wall, a ghostly guide for the painting to come. It's tedious, exacting work that requires a steady hand and immense patience. The most high-pressure task in fresco painting, however, is applying the final, smooth layer of plaster, the intonaco. Fresco, which means fresh, in Italian, must be painted onto this plaster while it is still wet, so that the pigments bond chemically with the wall itself. This means you can only apply as much fresh plaster as the master can paint in a single day. This section is called a giornata, or a day's work. At the start of each day, the master will indicate which section he plans to paint. It is your job, as an increasingly trusted assistant, to mix the fine plaster for the intonaco to a perfect consistency and apply it smoothly over the designated area of the arricho. The pressure is immense. The plaster must be perfect, not too wet, not too dry, and absolutely smooth. The edges must be carefully managed to blend with the next day's work. The master is waiting, his brushes and colors ready, and the plaster is already beginning to dry. You work quickly, efficiently, your trowel moving with a skill born of long practice. There is no room for error. A flawed patch of plaster could ruin the day's painting and force the master to chip it all away and start again, an unthinkable waste of time and a source of his considerable wrath. You are a vital cog in this time-sensitive machine, your skill with plaster as important in this moment as the master's skill with a brush. The exhaustion at the end of a day of fresco work is profound. It's a weariness born not just of hauling buckets and climbing scaffolds, but of the intense concentration and the relentless pressure of the drying plaster, a race against time itself. You fall asleep not just with aching muscles, but with the phantom feeling of the smooth, cool plaster still on your hands. The great masterpieces of the Renaissance that we gaze upon in all were, with few exceptions, not the work of a single, solitary hand. The name of the master, a Verrocchio, a Ghirlandaio, a Perugino, was more like a modern brand name, a guarantee of a certain style, quality, and vision. But the execution of that vision, especially on large-scale commissions like altarpieces or fresco cycles, was almost always a collaborative, workshop effort. The bottega functioned like a well-oiled machine, with a clear and efficient division of labor designed to produce high-quality work on schedule to satisfy demanding patrons. The maestro's genius lay not only in his personal skill with a brush but also in his ability to manage his team, to orchestrate the talents of his various assistants to create a seamless, unified whole. His was the disegno, the overall design and intellectual conception of the work. He would create the preliminary drawings, the detailed cartoons, and would personally paint the most critical passages of the final piece. These were typically the parts that required the most skill and carried the most emotional weight, the faces and hands of the principal figures, such as the Virgin Mary, Christ, or the patron saint. These were the focal points, the areas upon which the viewer's eye would rest and by which the painting's success would be judged. The rest of the painting, and the rest, could often constitute the vast majority of the painted surface, was delegated to the assistants. This could include vast areas of sky, detailed architectural backgrounds, complex landscape elements, decorative patterning, and even the drapery or entire bodies of secondary figures. The challenge for the assistant was immense. They were not encouraged to express their own artistic personality. On the contrary, their primary goal was to suppress it. They had to learn to perfectly imitate the master's specific way of modeling a form, of applying a highlight, of blending a shadow. The workshop had a house style, and every brush stroke applied by an assistant had to be indistinguishable from that of the maestro himself. This required years of practice, intense observation, and a humbling sublimation of one's own creative impulses. An assistant who painted too much like himself was not an asset but a problem. The final painting had to appear as if it flowed from a single, divine hand, and the assistants were the anonymous conduits for that unified vision. The pressure to conform, to be a perfect mimic, was a constant and mentally draining part of the job. Now, picture yourself, Piero. You are perhaps 16 now. You have prepared dozens of panels, ground mountains of pigment, and plastered acres of wall. You know the materials of your craft with an intimacy that is second nature. One morning, the master is working on a large panel depicting the Annunciation. He has already painted the serene face of the Virgin and the divine countenance of the Archangel Gabriel. Today, he plans to work on the vast expanse of deep, ultramarine blue drapery that falls from the angel's shoulders. He turns to you. Your heart leaps into your throat. He doesn't speak, but simply gestures with his brush towards a clean palette and the small, precious pot of ultramarine you ground yesterday, a pigment so expensive, derived from lapis lazuli, that it was worth more than its weight in gold. This is the moment. He is trusting you. Not with a face, not with a hand, but with a color, a fold of cloth. It feels like being handed the key to heaven itself. Your hands tremble slightly as you prepare your palette. You crack a fresh egg, letting the viscous, translucent white slide away until only the perfect, trembling orb of the yolk remains. You puncture the yolk's membrane and let the golden liquid run onto your palette. Then, with a palette knife, you take a small amount of the brilliant blue pigment and mix it with the egg yolk, working it into a smooth, luminous paint. This is egg tempera, the medium of your time. It dries quickly and cannot be easily blended on the panel, so all your modeling of light and shadow must be achieved through the patient application of tiny, cross-hatched brushstrokes, or tratteggio. The master watches you, his eyes missing nothing. Not too much yolk, Piero, he says, his voice calm but firm. It will make the color too glossy and dark. You adjust the mixture, your face hot with concentration. He hands you a fine-tipped brush made of sable. The drapery. Start with the midtones. Follow the lines from the cartoon. Build the shadows slowly. You dip your brush in the paint, take a steadying breath, and touch it to the pristine white gesso panel. The first stroke of blue is terrifyingly permanent. You begin to lay down the color, your hand moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm. You are not thinking about creating art. You are thinking about obedience. You are trying to replicate the exact way you have seen the master paint drapery 100 times before. The precise angle of the hatching, the way the lines follow the form of the imagined fold, the slow building of darker tones by adding more pigment. It is painstaking, mentally exhausting work. Your neck and shoulders ache from leaning in close to the panel. Your eyes sting from the intense focus. The master circles the workshop, attending to other tasks, but you feel his presence constantly, a weight on your shoulders. After an hour, he returns to inspect your work. He squints, his head tilted. You hold your breath. The lines are too hesitant, he says, not unkindly. You are drawing with a brush, not painting. Let the strokes breathe. And your shadows are muddy. You're not leaving enough of the mid-tone showing through. He takes the brush from your hand. Watch. And in a few effortless, magical minutes he demonstrates. His hand is so sure, so quick. He lays down a series of strokes that perfectly describe the fall of light on a fold of cloth, creating an illusion of depth and texture that seems impossible to you. He hands the brush back. Now you continue. You feel a mixture of deflation and renewed determination. You try to emulate his movements, to capture the rhythm you just witnessed. You paint for hours, your world shrinking to that small patch of blue, the brush, and the master's instruction echoing in your head. At the end of the day, your section of the drapery is complete. It is not perfect, but the master deems it acceptable. You are exhausted in a way you have never been before. Grinding pigments was physically tiring, but this is a deeper weariness. It's the fatigue that comes from holding every muscle in your body still, from pouring all of your mental energy into a single, repetitive, high-stakes task. As you clean the precious sable brushes with immense care, you look at the angel's robe. Your work is there, a part of this glorious whole. A quiet thrill of pride runs through you. But you also understand something new. You didn't invent those folds. You didn't choose that divine shade of blue. You were a tool, a skilled extension of the master's hand. You were a supporting actor, painting the set for the stars to shine upon. Your dream of being a painter is no longer a vague fantasy. It is a real, tangible, and profoundly tiring job. As an apprentice matured into a senior assistant or a journeyman, their role in the workshop became ever more critical, and paradoxically, ever more invisible. A highly skilled assistant, after years of diligent imitation, could replicate the master's style with such fidelity that their contributions to a painting are often a matter of debate for art historians today. Scholars scrutinize brushstrokes and underdrawings, trying to identify the unseen hands that worked on a single panel. Was that angel painted by the master, or by his star pupil? Is that landscape background the work of a journeyman? This very ambiguity is a testament to the success of the workshop system. The goal was a unified final product, and the individual authorship of its various parts was subsumed under the singular, marketable name of the maestro. The senior assistant was the ghost in the machine, his skill essential, his identity erased. This anonymity was the price of his education and his position within the creative process. While he might take immense private pride in a beautifully rendered passage, public credit was never a possibility. The future for such an assistant was also far from certain. Upon completing his apprenticeship, typically after 6 to 8 years, he was technically a free man, a journeyman who could earn a wage. But the ultimate goal for any ambitious artist was to become a master in his own right, to open his own bottega. This was an enormous leap. First, he had to be accepted as a master into the local painters' guild, the Arte dei Medici Speziali in Florence, for example. This often required the submission of a masterpiece for approval by the guild's elders, a significant undertaking in itself. Even with guild approval, starting a workshop required capital, to rent a space, to buy expensive materials, to hire his own apprentices. Many skilled journeymen simply couldn't afford it. They would spend their entire careers as high-level assistants in the workshops of more famous masters, their own artistic ambitions forever secondary to the business of their employer. They were caught in a difficult position, too skilled to be mere apprentices, but lacking the fame, connections, or capital to become masters themselves. Furthermore, this lifetime of artistic labor came at a severe physical cost. The relentless work, often in poorly lit and ventilated rooms, took a toll on the body. But the most insidious danger came from the very materials of their craft. The pigments they ground and mixed day after day were often highly toxic. Lead white, prized for its opacity and brilliance, was a staple on every palette. Chronic exposure to lead dust could lead to severe neurological damage, colic, and anemia, a condition known as painter's colic. Orpiment and realgar, the sources for brilliant yellows and oranges, were arsenic sulfides. Vermilion, the most vibrant red, was made from mercury sulfide. Inhaling the dust from these minerals over many years could cause debilitating long-term health problems and significantly shorten one's life. The bottega, for all its creative energy, was a hazardous work environment. The exhaustion of the daily grind was compounded by a slow, creeping poisoning from the very colors that created such beauty. The price of creating heavenly visions was often a very earthly decline in health. Now let us return to you, Piero, for one final moment. You are 20 years old. Your apprenticeship is officially over, and you have stayed on in the master's bottega as a paid journeyman. You are no longer the boy who swept the floors. You are a trusted, highly skilled painter. The master relies on you for complex passages, for delicate details, for keeping the younger apprentices in line. The workshop has just completed its most important commission in years, a massive altarpiece for the main chapel of a powerful banking family. Today, the patrons have come for the final viewing before the painting is transported to the church. The air in the bottega is tense with anticipation. The great panel stands on an easel in the center of the room, glowing with color and gold leaf. The patrons, dressed in rich velvets and brocades, whisper among themselves, their faces masks of awed appreciation. The master stands beside his creation, accepting their praise with a practiced, humble dignity. He speaks of his vision, of his long hours of devotion, of his prayerful effort to do justice to the sacred story. You stand in the background with the other assistants silent, your hands clean for once, your role now simply to be an invisible part of the workshop's backdrop. You listen to the patrons praise the serene beauty of the Madonna's face, a passage the master labored on for weeks. They marvel at the lifelike agony in the expression of a saint, also the master's work. Your eyes, however, drift to other parts of the painting. You see the distant, hazy blue mountains in the landscape behind the main figures. You painted those mountains. You remember the delicate blending of azurite and white, the soft, feathery brushstrokes you used to create the illusion of atmospheric distance. Your gaze moves to the intricate pattern on a swath of green brocade worn by a kneeling donor. You remember the days you spent on that section alone, patiently laying down the gold leaf highlights, the tiny, precise lines that give the fabric its shimmering texture. You see the marble floor upon which the figures stand, its geometric perspective so carefully constructed, its polished surface reflecting the colored robes above. That was your work, too. You, and the other journeymen, painted nearly 3/4 of this masterpiece. A strange feeling settles in your chest. It is a deep, quiet pride, a profound knowledge of your own skill and contribution. You know every secret of this painting, every layer of gesso, every glaze of color. You know the story of its creation in a way these wealthy patrons never will. But intertwined with that pride is a subtle, melancholic ache. Your name will never be spoken in connection with this work. In the history of this painting, you are a ghost. You are the unseen hand. The master thanks his patrons, and they leave, satisfied. The tension in the room dissipates. The master turns to his team. Good work, he says, a simple, rare acknowledgement that means more to you than all the patron's flowery praise. You are exhausted. It's not just the physical ache from hours of leaning over the panel, or the mental strain of perfect imitation. It's a deeper, more soulful exhaustion, the weariness of pouring your entire being into a creation that you can never truly call your own. And so, as the day ends and you clean the brushes one last time, you look at your hands, stained with traces of ultramarine and lead white. They are the hands of an artist, but an anonymous one. Your future is uncertain. Perhaps one day you will save enough, or find a patron of your own, to open a small bottega. Or perhaps you will spend the rest of your days here, a respected and essential part of this workshop, your brushstrokes forever hidden within the masterpieces of another man. Let us now gently leave Piero and his workshop, and let the sounds and efforts of that distant time fade away. Think of those thousands of unseen hands, the countless apprentices and assistants, grinding, preparing, and painting in workshops all across Renaissance Europe. Their names are lost to history, their individual stories forgotten. They were the foundation, the scaffolding, the hidden architecture upon which the great, celebrated masterpieces were built. Their exhaustion, their sacrifice, their anonymous skill were all woven into the very fabric of the art we so admire. Imagine the soft, flickering candlelight of 1,000 workshops after the masters and patrons have gone home. Imagine the quiet pride of a young man looking at a finished piece, knowing the secret of his own contribution. There is no applause for him, no fame, only the quiet satisfaction of a difficult job done well, of beauty brought into the world through his own patient labor. This is a legacy not of names, but of shared creation. It's a quiet, humble, and deeply human story. Allow the gentleness of this thought to settle over you. The labor is done. The colors have been laid. The masterpiece is complete. Let the quiet dignity of these forgotten artists, these unseen hands, guide you into a peaceful and well-deserved rest. There is no more work to be done tonight. Only sleep. Good night.